10,000 years. Bless the Lord. I love it. Thank you for singing those words together and worshiping. Open your Bibles to Luke chapter 22. And this Sunday we continue this series we started about 4 weeks ago, looking at Jesus' last dinner, last supper with friends. And we're looking at what his message was to them and saying, will you eat this bread, which represents my body given for you, and will you drink this cup, which represents the blood of my life that was shed for you? And we're doing all of this as a season of preparation. We've been talking about, are you ready for this? Are you ready for God to do something new through this church, but then also new through and in your own personal life, spiritually, and then extending out to this world around us? So today we're talking about filling our cups. And I want to start by reading words to, this is the chorus from a hymn that when I was a kid way back in the day, we used to sing this, it seemed like every week. And here's how the chorus goes in this hymn. Fill my cup, Lord. I lift it up, Lord. Come and quench this thirsting of my soul. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Fill my cup. Fill it up and make me whole. All right, so I need to see a few hands. Who sang this growing up? Any of you? Like three. Everyone else is under 30, and we're not even born when we're singing this, so that's awesome. Luke chapter 22, verse 17, we read this about Jesus taking this cup. It's Passover. They're having a meal together, and he starts to pass this cup around. When he had taken a cup, he gave thanks, and then he said, take this cup, and share it among you. So now there's 12 of his friends, his followers, his disciples, and him. That's 13 people drinking from one cup. So this is my conjecture. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I think he had to fill it to the brim. If 13 people are going to drink from one cup, it better be filled all the way up, and then they start to pass it around. And they all drink from this one full cup. Today, I'm coming to you with a very simple prayer, a 3-word prayer. I want to invite you to think about it and then start to pray it. And it's this: fill my cup. And we had just a moment ago, fill my cup to the brim, all the way up. And if we keep reading about Jesus and filled cups, we read in John chapter 4 that he meets a woman by a well, and she doesn't just have a cup, she has a bucket. And she comes to him with a bucket, and he says this, sir, give me this water, verse 15, so that I won't get thirsty anymore and have to keep coming here to draw water. And so she says, she just doesn't have a cup she wants him to fill. She says, fill my bucket. But this is the prayer I want to invite you to pray today. It's a simple prayer, but it carries with it a deep, meaningful, rich piece of theology. God, fill my cup. Today, maybe you come here this morning and your cup is just half full, or maybe it's so close to the bottom you can see to the bottom of the cup, or maybe it's completely empty and it's clanging around like a beggar with change inside. Maybe that's how your cup feels. I didn't know the Arizona desert stretched so far when I first moved here 11 years ago. But you find that out quickly if you start to drive really in any direction. But I was driving towards California with my family. I think it was fall break, our first fall break here. And we're driving to California, and I'd come through Blythe, and I looked at my gas gauge, and it said 50, 60 miles to empty. I think, well, I'm fine. And so I kept going. Who knew the desert stretches now for another 100 miles without a gas station? Well, I get 50 miles out, my gas gauge is running on empty, and it says still it's 50 miles to more gas, and I'm in trouble. So I pulled over. It looked like a town, and I'm exiting the freeway. Maybe you've seen this town. There's a circle of palm trees that the people burned down. They burned them down. If you have palm trees in the desert, it's the only foliage within 100 miles. I wouldn't burn it down, but they did. And then I pulled up I thought it was a gas station, but they burned that down too. That's burned down. And so there's no gas. And I've tried to it looks like a scene out of Mad Max. That's where I am, right in the middle of Mad Max. And the people look like they're from Mad Max. And none of them are very helpful. Finally, I find this because I've got like 10 gallons to empty, or 10 miles to empty. I can't go anywhere. So I find this guy, and there's like a California highway repair station there, and I could see some pumps. I saw a pump in there. And so I get him out of his office, and I said, please, let me buy some gas off you. And he goes, I'm not allowed to sell it. I said, you don't understand. And I'm trying to, hey, here's a 20, you want to have dinner with your wife tonight? Something like that, anything. And he's going, I'm not allowed to sell it. I said, well, I have 4 kids, and we're going to die in the desert. And so finally, he says, okay. He says, I'll give you some gas. But before I give you some gas, he said, I need to tell you. He said, you can't go into the desert with half a tank of gas. He didn't know I'd enter with like a quarter tank. He said, you have to fill the tank up like I'm a kid. He's talking to me. And I said, okay. And I tried to pay him for the gas, and he said, I can't take your money. And he fills my tank all the way up. He says, I'm not allowed to take your money, but I'll fill your tank. And so I have a big thank you for that's our taxpayer dollars hard at work. Actually, it's California's taxpayer dollars putting gas in my tank. But, it's like that. Maybe it's like that with you right now. Maybe life feels like a desert, and your cup, your tank is empty. And maybe you've come here this morning, and it feels like it's completely empty. And maybe you've been pouring out into the lives of your children or your husband or your wife. You've been pouring out into the lives of friends. You've been pouring out at work, and you feel like your cup is empty. And if that's how you feel today, then I invite you to pray this simple prayer, fill my cup. When Jesus comes along, it's a Passover meal where they're having this cup that he passes. And I don't know if you know much about the Passover meal, but they pass the cup. The host is in charge of the meal, and he passes the cup around 4 times. There's 4 cups in the Passover meal. And now when he passes this cup, it's the 3rd cup. And the 3rd cup in Hebrew is called Hegula. Hegula means the cup of blessing. This is the blessing cup. This is the cup that God wants to bless your life with. And that's how they saw it, and that's how they drank from this. They drank from this cup of blessing. Greg Mortensen, maybe you've heard his name, he wrote a book that hit the New York Times bestseller list for like a year, and it was called 3 Cups of Tea. And as I was reading 3 Cups of Tea, I kept waiting for him to explain where the title came from. And then he writes this: the first time you share tea with a Balti, he says, it's an old Balti proverb, you are a stranger. The second time you take tea, you are an honored guest. The 3rd time you share a cup of tea, you become a family member. The 3rd cup is the cup of blessing. Your cup is full. And so today, I invite you to pray, to take this cup and pray that God turns it into the cup of blessing for your life. That's how the Hebrew people talked about it. And my invitation is to pray this prayer today. If your cup looks empty, feels empty, and if you've been running on empty, then pray, God, fill my cup. And maybe as you hear me say that, or you think about praying that, maybe it feels selfish. Maybe to you it feels presumptuous or even audacious. And I want to say, no, it's not. Because our God is in the cup filling business, and sometimes we forget that. We have this truth. If you look at the Bible, or if you know great godly people, isn't it true that they always pray this prayer? God, fill my cup to the brim. That's the people in the Bible. If you know any great godly people today, that's how they pray. I think sometimes we forget when we ask God to fill our cup that he has limitless, absolutely limitless resources and goodness to fill it with. It's kind of like this. When I was a kid, we didn't have TV where I lived. And so, when I was like 12 years old, I'd get bored, and so I'd start reading my parents' Reader's Digest. That was like Twitter of the late 1970s. Maybe you don't know that. And so I don't think Reader's Digest is even in print now. But I read every Reader's Digest from like 1978 to 1982, all of those. And one of them had a story. And so I think this is to the best of my memory. I could be wrong. I don't think I'm making this up. The facts around it I know are true. But there were some fishermen in this Reader's Digest story who leave Venezuela just for an afternoon of fishing. And as they're fishing, a storm blows in and it sweeps them out to sea and it breaks their mast and they have no way to get back to shore. By the time the storm is over, they can't even see land and they're just drifting. And they didn't bring hardly any water or food because they were just supposed to be there for an hour. And so within a day, they're out of food and water. By the third day, they're not only just starving to death, but they're actually dying of thirst. By the fifth day, sixth day, seventh day, they think they're going to die that day because they haven't had anything to drink in 7 days. And just when they're about to give up, on that seventh day, they see a boat coming their way, and they start to wave frantically, and the captain comes their way. And he starts to pull them on board. They're weak, and they're hungry, and they're saying, agua, agua, give us some water. And he's giving them water, and as he's giving them water, he said, why are you thirsty? And they said, we've been at sea for 7 days, and there's nothing to eat or drink. He says, well, you shouldn't be thirsty. He said, all the water around you, you can drink. And they're like, what? And what they didn't know was, he said, you're at the mouth of the Amazon. You see, when the Amazon empties into the Atlantic Ocean for 250 miles, it spreads out fresh water. A plume 200 miles wide and 250 miles long. It's just fresh water. You can't see land. And the captain said, all you had to do was reach over the edge of the boat, and there was an ocean of water to drink. And they're like really mad at themselves for almost dying. So I think that's a true story. I don't think I made it up. You can check on the World Wide Web and tell me if you find that. But here's my point. Your God, your Father in heaven, has an ocean of good things to fill your cup with. And sometimes we don't even ask, sometimes we don't even bother to dip into the ocean around us. We have a hard time understanding that our God has limitless blessings and good things for our lives, because we live in a world where everything is limited, everything runs out, everything we have finishes. Last Sunday, if you were here, we took cups and we wrote each other's names on them, and then we filled them with incredible drinks. And I had met a young guy named David and wrote his name on the cup, and I came over here to where we had like cafe, mocha, chocolate, ice cream, whipped cream all together. It was incredible. And I held my cup out for this high schooler to fill, and he puts one ladle in there. And I go, hey, that's just the bottom. I got to take this back today. I need more. And he goes, I'm running out. I said, he needs more than that. And he gives me half a ladle now with it. It's not even halfway. And I try to get him to give more. He says, Palmer, we're going to run out. That's all you get. And so I had to leave. And I'm apologizing to David. I'm sorry that we're being so cheap right now here, because we're running out. You see, we live in a world where everything runs out, but not with your Father in heaven. James used to say this. This is Jesus' brother. He says, you do not have because you do not ask. Here's what I want to say about asking God. This is kind of a key idea. It's in your handout. When we ask God, I said maybe it feels presumptuous to fill our cup, but it's not. When you ask God to fill your cup, you're not asking for more of what you can already get for yourself. You are crying out for his unlimited goodness that only God has the power to give to you. And so James says, if you don't have, it's because you're not asking. That's James 4:2. Here's what we miss, is that it is God's nature to bless. Your God is a generous God. And today I want to help all of us reclaim this radical but basic biblical truth that God is ultimately good. He is tirelessly good. He is infinitely good. And he wants to fill your cup. Here's how Jesus said it in John chapter 10. He used to say this. He says, verse 10, I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. Some of your Bibles say and have it abundantly, but the ESV says and have it to the full. And I think that works well this morning. And so today, I invite you to bring your cup to God. At the end of this morning, I invite you to literally hold your hands out and say, God, fill my cup, because I can't do it on my own anymore. And Jesus says, you have this Father in heaven with all of this limitless ability, and you just don't ask. Turn back to the book of Matthew chapter 7, and Jesus talks about this idea, and he says this, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find. This is Matthew 7, verse 7, knock and the door will be open to you, for everyone who asks receives, And everyone who seeks, they find. And those who knock, the doors are opened. He says, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, that hurt a little bit, all of us, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask? That's what Jesus says. He says, you don't have because you're not asking. The problem maybe is that we go through life with half-filled cups, and we think, or even with empty cups, and we think that's all God can do. And we get used to it. We get accustomed to it. Or we forget that our God is not just a God. You see, it's a false narrative that your Father in heaven is only interested in punishing you when you make a mistake. The true narrative that Jesus kept talking about is that your Father in heaven, this is Matthew 19:17, is ultimately good, is what he says. And when you pray that he fill your cup and fill it to the brim, he doesn't just do that. He fills it. When you pray this prayer, he fills it to overflowing. That's what David used to write in the Psalms way back. If you turn with me to Psalm 23, or maybe you know it well. And David says this, verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. And then he says, my cup overflows. And so when you pray, I hope you see this morning that your cup will overflow. Paul used to write about this. Ephesians 3:20, he says this, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. Eugene Peterson, he says it like this, God can do anything, far more than you could ever imagine or guess or request in your wildest dreams. Well, I can imagine and dream a lot. And Paul says that's not enough. And so this morning, I wonder, how big is the cup that you are holding? Because sometimes the cup we bring to God is just too small. I brought some cups to show you, kind of to help you see what I'm talking about. And first of all, I brought a cup from our children's ministry. This is, if you have a 2-year-old, they have them drink out of this. That's not even going to satisfy a 2-year-old. We need bigger cups in our children's ministry. It's a Dixie cup, literally. And you will definitely die in the desert with that. But, sometimes when we come to God, this is about all we bring him. We say, God, fill that. We think he just has a little ability. But here's the good news. In America, we know how to drink. Soda is what I'm talking about. And we have big gulps like this. Look at this. This might satisfy you. And here's the thing. It's 44 ounces of carbonated sugar. And I'm just going to warn you on a side note, if you drink all of this, you need to put in about 3.5 hours on the treadmill, and then you'll be back to even. But so you have this choice of either coming to God with a Dixie cup, and he might fill that, or he will, or you bring this and say, God, fill that. I was in Brazil with my sons in June, and we were staying with this great godly family, and we woke up the first morning, and I know in Brazil they have incredible coffee, and I smelled it brewing, so I said, cafe, obrigado, please, something like that's Portuguese. I don't know much, but I know how to please coffee. And they brought us coffee, and they brought it in an espresso cup like this. And I was like, literally this big, and I was like, what am I, 5? Are we going to play house? What's happening here? What is that? That's not going to satisfy me. I'll have a raging headache in about 15 minutes. And so it took like 8 of these to finally find some satisfaction. And I've learned very quick, the host keeps going, mas café, and they're bringing it in. And we just kept drinking, and it was never enough. By day 2, day 3, she borrowed mugs from her neighbors, and now we had more. I brought a mug from my house. This is one of our mugs in my house. This will satisfy you. That's a mug right there. This is one of my wife's mugs. It's pink, so I don't actually use it. But and so you have this option. You can come to God with a Dixie cup or an espresso cup, with a doily, something like that, and he'll fill that. Or you can come with him with a big gulp or with this really pink man-sized cup. Those just go together. Anyway, you have that choice. And I would ask you this morning, what kind of cup, what are you saying, what are you asking God to fill? Malachi, the ancient prophet, used to talk about what comes from heaven when we pray, and he says he will open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that it will be ridiculous. Now, here's what I'm not saying. Don't leave here saying Palmer's preaching some kind of cheap prosperity gospel. I'm not saying if you pray like this tomorrow morning, there'll be a Bentley in your driveway or a Rolex on your wrist. I'm not saying that. But I want to invite you to finally give God permission to fill your cup. Jesus said this in John 10:10, I have come that you might have life to the full. That's the kind of overflowing cup that God has for you. Elijah, there's this ancient story, true story in the Old Testament about the prophet Elisha. And he ends up at a widow's house. And he's at this widow's house, and she says, I can keep you here, but I don't have anything to feed you. I need some oil. And he says, well, bring your son in. And he sends the son out. He said, go to the neighbors, because she just had one little jar of oil. And she said, I can't feed you for 2 days. And so he said to the son, he said, go out to the neighbors and borrow all the jars you can find. And the son comes back in with all these jars, and they put them on the table, and he starts to fill them, one after another. And he fills, maybe it's a couple of dozen jars, and they all are filled. Now here's the question. What if the son had kept going to more houses? What if instead of a couple of dozen jars, he brought back 100 jars? Then doesn't God fill those too? He fills when you ask him, when you say, fill my cup. For you, he fills it to overflowing. In the book of Matthew, chapter 14, Jesus is on a hillside and he's preaching and he's just pouring his heart out. And then he gets tapped on the shoulders by one of his disciples, his friends. They say, hey, it's lunchtime. You're going a little long. We're supposed to be out of here by 12, and it's now 12:15. And people's kids are crying in the nursery, and people are hungry. And could you call it, and so he stops preaching. And then listen to this. He just has a little bit to offer to God. He's got 5,000 people to feed, and he prays this. Then he had the people sit on the grass, Matthew 14:20. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he lifted his face to heaven in prayer, and he asked God to bless it. And then he doesn't ask God to fill a cup. He asks him to fill some baskets. They have a bunch of empty baskets, and he fills basket after basket after basket until when everyone is fed, they have baskets left over, and they put them in the fridge for breakfast. That's how much they had. Just more than enough to overflowing. Jesus, my point is, forever gives us permission to ask until your cup is overflowing. Our God isn't just a God of enough. He's a God of more than enough. Sometimes I hear Christians ask questions like, is it okay for me to ask God to bless my business, or to bless my work, or to bless my job, or to bless my investments? I want to say absolutely, absolutely. Because this cup of life, in it holds all of those things. And he wants to bless that. And maybe right now this morning, your cup is overflowing, and your God has been incredibly good. And I just want to pause and ask you to think about it, because maybe it's overflowing and you haven't even done anything with it, and you've just been complaining. But I want to say maybe your cup is full. In fact, your cup is overflowing if you have enough just for today. In my opinion, I'd say your cup is overflowing if you have a warm bed tonight to sleep in. I would say if you have a finger painting hanging on your fridge with a magnet, your cup is overflowing. If you have dinner with friends, whenever you have dinner or lunch with friends, your cup is overflowing. When it rains in Arizona, your cup is overflowing, about 2 or 3 times a year when it rains. If you go home this afternoon and you're in your house and you smell steak on the barbecue, or maybe it's just hamburger helper in the crock pot. Either way, your cup is overflowing. If you've ever walked on the beach with someone that you love, your cup is overflowing. If this weekend you got to sit in the stands and watch your daughter cheer, or watch a son or daughter march and play an instrument, or you got to watch your son play football, your cup is overflowing. If last night you got to kiss anyone goodnight, your mother, your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter, if you got to kiss anyone goodnight, your cup is overflowing. And sometimes we forget that God is filling our cups and we miss it. And so that brings me to my final thought this morning, and it's this. If your cup is overflowing, then share. Now share your cup. If this cup has become a cup of blessing for you, then it's time to share it. Let's go back to where we started in Luke chapter 22. And let's read this verse 17 one more time. When he had taken a cup and given thanks, he said, "Take this and share it among you." This cup of blessing, this hagula, was meant to be shared and passed around. I shared with some of you a while ago about a moment when I was about 9 years old in the bush, and I want to share it again, but I want to connect it to another thought. So allow me to share it one more time. But I said that when I was about 9 years old, my dad, every Sunday, he would walk us deep in the bush in Liberia where I grew up, and it seemed like he always wanted to walk forever. So we had been going like 3, maybe 4 hours this one hot Liberian Sunday, and we come on this clearing, and here's 2 Americans, and they greet us, and I keep waiting for the invitation into their house because it was a rare thing to see an American in the bush, and we always had them in, and we'd give them cold drinks, and we would have something to eat, but they never invite us in. 10 minutes later, we're back on the path, and I'm thirsty, and I know they have a fridge because I can hear the generator running, and I'm picturing a fridge with orange Fanta inside, and they never offer us a thing, not even a cup of water. And I asked my dad, what's wrong with those people? And my dad said, well, they're from the kind of church, the kind of denomination that practices what's called secondary separation. I didn't understand. He said, they don't like the pastors that I work with here. And it's the strangest thing. That was a long time ago. But then not too long ago, Veronica and I were in Liberia, and we had 2 neighbors, Bill and Pat Clark. And I saw them handle thirsty people differently. You see, in the afternoons in Liberia, every afternoon where we lived, the women, the vendors from Guinea, only in about a half an hour from my house, they would come with fruits and vegetables. And every afternoon about 1 o'clock, they would knock on our door and they'd say, hey, bananas, oranges, pineapples, grapefruit, they're trying to sell you everything. The thing is, if I bought it on Monday, they're still coming back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'd go, hey, I just bought from you yesterday. Come back next Monday. And so sometimes I was a little short with them, a little annoyed that they were knocking on my door again. But the Clarks were never annoyed. I noticed this because one afternoon I walk out my back door and there's a party on the back porch of the Clarks' house. They had all these vendors, the women from Guinea who had babies strapped to their back, and they'd been sweating in the hot sun. I never noticed this. They were all sitting on their porch. And the Clarks had bought their limes and their lemons and literally cut them up and squeezed them, and put sugar in with them, and they made lemonade and limeade. And they're giving all of these hot, sweating women and in the hot sun something cold to drink. You see, the Clarks knew that if your cup is overflowing, if you have more than enough, then you better share it with the people around you. And maybe this morning, maybe you know as we talk about this, your cup is overflowing. And maybe this morning, in spite of the fact that it's overflowing, you're not sharing it with others and blessing others with it. You see, this cup, like I said when we started, is meant to be a cup of blessing. And if your cup is overflowing, then it's meant to be a blessing to someone else. When I was in real young, I'd go to our Presbyterian church, and communion was served in little tiny plastic glasses. You might call them a shot glass, but anyway, they're plastic. And as a junior higher, you always wondered what would happen if you squeeze it real hard. Well, I'm going to tell you, it kind of blows up. You think, oh, it's pretty dense, it's holding it pretty well, and boom, it goes everywhere. And it cracks, and it breaks, and it spills all over the floor. And I think sometimes our cups are overflowing, but we hold them close and tight and we squeeze them because we think that God has limited resources and he might run out. And I want to say this morning, if this cup has been a cup of blessing for you, then it's time to pass it around. It's time for you to convert your blessing into a blessing for someone else. I love hearing the stories from the Grove. I had a couple stop me just a few Sundays ago, and they said, we've been blessed. They said, we don't make a lot, but we were just blessed. And so could you use this to bless others? I said, really? And I came back to them and I said, would it be okay if we took some of that? And I have some friends in Liberia who lead a school for elementary kids, and their teachers are wanting to leave because of the Ebola. Could we just bless those teachers? And they said, sure. And I said, I know a couple who leads an orphanage in Haiti, and they're living in a hot metal shed, a storage shed, since the earthquake. Can we help get them out with some of this? They said, sure. And so now their cup of blessing is overflowing and blessing people in Liberia and in Haiti. Do you see how the cup of when God blesses your life is meant to be converted into a blessing for others? That's what God said to Abraham way back. He said in Genesis 12:2, I will bless you and I'll make your name great so that you will be a blessing to others. And so maybe he's filled your cup with abilities. Maybe he's filled your cup with influence and resources and companies and employees. And my question is today, what are you doing with that? So I want to conclude where we started, because maybe you arrived here today and you resonated when I said maybe your cup is empty and hollow. And if you are sitting here right now and you feel like your cup of life is dry, then I say this morning it's time for you to start asking God to fill it. And so I want to ask you to stand, and I'm going to read this first, and then I want to ask you to read it with me. So go ahead and stand and just listen as I read this one more time. I want to invite you to make this hymn, the words, your prayer today. But just listen one more time. Fill my cup, Lord. I lift it up, Lord. Come and quench this thirsting of my soul. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Fill my cup, fill it up, and make me whole. So would you read these words with me as your prayer? Out loud. Fill my cup, Lord. I lift it up, Lord. Come and quench this thirsting of my soul. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Fill my cup, fill it up, and make me whole.